Oklahoma's prairie is tearing itself apart, and the fire that just exploded across the Panhandle is rewriting every record in American wildfire history. In 8 hours, a single blaze consumed 145,000 acres. Fire captains on the ground clocked the front moving at 30 to 40 miles per hour, with 40-foot flames devouring 3 to 4 football fields of grassland every single second. Police went door to door across southwest Woodward, ordering residents to leave immediately. 4,000 people fled their homes as winds gusting over 65 miles per hour turned the horizon into a wall of orange and black. But here's what made veteran firefighters freeze in disbelief. By the following evening, the fire had doubled. 283,000 acres gone. An area larger than the entire city of Chicago burned in barely 30 hours. And the fire was not finished. It had already crossed a state line, ripping into southern Kansas with no containment in sight. Firefighting aircraft were grounded because the wind speeds exceeded safe flight limits. Ground crews found themselves outpaced, unable to get ahead of a blaze that moved faster than highway traffic. The smoke column rose so high it was detected on weather satellites within hours of ignition, and buried inside the data streaming from those satellites was a detail that would alarm fire scientists across the country. The rate of spread was unlike anything recorded for a grass fire on the southern plains. How does a single spark become a megafire faster than any in modern American history? And why were the people in its path given almost no time to escape? February 17, 2026, 11:40 in the morning, Central Standard Time. A fire ignites southeast of the town of Beaver in Beaver County, Oklahoma, deep in the narrow strip of land known as the Oklahoma Panhandle. The cause remains under investigation. Within minutes, the flames find exactly what they need: dormant winter grass, baked to a moisture content of 2 to 3%. That is drier than kiln-dried lumber. The National Weather Service had already issued its most severe possible fire weather outlook for the region. The Storm Prediction Center designated the southern plains at extremely critical risk, level 3 of 3, a classification reserved for the most dangerous fire conditions meteorologists can identify. Some of the warnings carried a rare tag called particularly dangerous situation. Red flag warnings stretched along a corridor more than 1,000 miles long, from northern New Mexico through Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. More than 750,000 people sat directly inside that level 3 zone. 21 million Americans were under fire weather watches across the plains. The atmosphere was primed for catastrophe, and the Ranger Road Fire delivered exactly that. By 2 in the afternoon, barely 2 hours after ignition, the fire had already consumed 15,000 acres. The winds were relentless. Sustained speeds of 25 to 40 miles per hour hammered the Panhandle, with gusts screaming past 60 to 70 miles per hour. Governor Kevin Stitt confirmed that winds were gusting over 65 miles per hour across the fire zone. Temperatures climbed into the low 80s Fahrenheit, running roughly 15 degrees above normal for mid-February. Relative humidity plunged below 10% in exposed areas. The air was so dry that moisture essentially ceased to exist at ground level. The grass did not just burn, it vaporized on contact with the advancing flame front. The speed of the fire stunned even experienced wildland firefighters. Captain Bill Nyer of the Ashland Rural Fire Department estimated the blaze was physically moving at 30 to 40 miles per hour, with flame heights reaching 40 feet. To understand that velocity in practical terms, a person running at full sprint covers roughly 15 miles per hour. The fire was advancing at more than twice that speed. There was no outrunning it on foot. There was barely time to outrun it in a vehicle. Aerial firefighting assets were requested immediately, but the wind speeds made flight impossible. Aircraft cannot safely operate in winds above 40 miles per hour. Governor Stitt confirmed he requested air support from Texas, but it was too windy to fly. The fire was on its own, driven entirely by wind, and there was nothing between it and the Kansas state line except open prairie. Understanding why the Ranger Road Fire exploded with such ferocity requires understanding the landscape it burned through. The Oklahoma Panhandle and the southern Kansas plains sit at the heart of America's grassland corridor, a vast stretch of mixed grass prairie that once supported enormous bison herds and now sustains cattle ranching operations spanning hundreds of thousands of acres. The dominant fuel in this region is native grass, which goes dormant every winter. By February, the standing dead grass forms a continuous carpet of fine fuel that ignites easily and burns with extraordinary speed. Unlike forest fires, which must work through heavy timber and can be slowed by terrain features, grass fires on the plains encounter almost nothing to check their advance. The terrain is flat for hundreds of miles. There are no mountain ridges to block wind. There are no rivers wide enough to serve as fire breaks. There are no large bodies of water to moderate humidity. The southern plains are, in fire behavior terms, the most efficient landscape for rapid fire spread in the entire United States. When wind, fuel, and dryness align, the result is a fire that behaves less like a wildfire and more like a weather event, advancing across the land at speeds normally associated with severe thunderstorms. But the fuel situation in 2026 was far worse than a typical winter. Oklahoma had just experienced its driest December on record in 2025. By the time February arrived, soil moisture readings across Texas, Oklahoma, and eastern Kansas had fallen below the 10th percentile, meaning conditions were drier than 90% of all years on record. The drought had been building for months. The grasslands were not merely dry, they were desiccated, stripped of every trace of moisture that might slow a fire's advance. There is a second fuel factor that has transformed fire behavior across the southern plains in recent decades. Eastern receder, also known as juniper, has been steadily encroaching into the grasslands for years. Where these trees are present, fire behavior escalates dramatically. Official Oklahoma fire situation reports noted single and group tree torching in juniper stands during the Ranger Road fire, with spotting potential reaching up to half a mile in brush fuel areas. Spotting occurs when burning embers are lofted ahead of the main fire front by wind, igniting new fires far in advance of the primary blaze. This means the fire was not just moving forward, it was leapfrogging, throwing ignition points across the landscape faster than crews could respond. The pattern of escalation followed a terrifying trajectory that left emergency managers racing against a fire that kept accelerating. By 9:45 on the evening of February 17, barely 10 hours after ignition, the Ranger Road fire had exploded to 145,000 acres, roughly 100,000 in Oklahoma, and 45,000 already across the state line in Kansas. The fire had traveled approximately 60 miles northeast from its origin point. Containment stood at 0%. Then came the doubling. On February 18, the fire continued to expand under sustained wind and drought conditions. By that evening, Oklahoma Forestry Services and the Kansas Forest Service jointly confirmed the fire had reached 283,283 acres. It had nearly doubled in a single day. Containment crept to just 15%. The Ranger Road fire had officially earned the designation of MEGAFIRE, a classification reserved for wildfires exceeding 100,000 acres. This was nearly 3 times that threshold. To visualize the scale, the burned area now exceeded the total land area of the city of Chicago. Satellite imagery captured the burn scar as a dark swath stretching across 2 states, clearly visible in orbital photographs. The smoke plume drifted hundreds of miles eastward, degrading air quality across the Central Plains and prompting health advisories in communities that were nowhere near the fire itself. While the fire raged across open prairie, the city of Woodward faced a direct threat from a separate but simultaneous blaze called the 43 fire. On the afternoon of February 17, approximately 4,000 residents in southwest Woodward were ordered to evacuate. Neighborhoods south of U.S. Highway 412 and west of 13th Street emptied rapidly. Nursing homes were evacuated. Northwestern Oklahoma State University's Woodward campus was cleared of students and staff. Oklahoma does not have mandatory evacuation authority, so the orders were technically voluntary, but the urgency left little room for hesitation. The evacuation held through the evening until a wind shift pushed the 43 fire away from the city's perimeter. Woodward Fire Marshal Marcus Stevenson later expressed astonishment that no structures inside city limits were lost, saying he did not think that outcome was possible given how close the flames came. Evacuees gathered at shelters set up at the Moreland Community Center, Moreland Methodist Church, and the Vichy Community Center while they waited for news about their neighborhoods. The smoke was so thick across the region that visibility on major highways dropped to near zero in places, and authorities urged drivers to stay away from southwest Woodward entirely. Beyond Woodward, evacuations were also issued for Gate, Oklahoma in Beaver County, for Tyrone, Oklahoma in Texas County due to the separate Stevens Fire, and for Ashland and Englewood, Kansas in Clark County, where Level 3 evacuation orders were issued before conditions improved the following morning. No civilian deaths have been confirmed. Beaver County Emergency Medical Services stated clearly that no lives were lost among the public, but the toll on firefighters was severe. 3 members of the Roston Fire Department were injured when their truck overturned in Beaver County. One was transported to the University of Oklahoma Medical Center with a brain bleed. Another suffered second-degree burns requiring surgery and skin grafts. A third sustained a broken leg. One additional local firefighter was injured in Beaver County. In Kansas, 4 firefighters were hurt, with 2 Clark County firefighters treated for burns and smoke inhalation at a Wichita burn unit. A separate incident left a Follett Volunteer Fire Department firefighter with 17 cracked ribs. These men and women drove into conditions that grounded aircraft and fought a fire moving faster than highway traffic. The destruction left behind tells a story measured not just in acres but in livelihoods. Numerous outbuildings were destroyed across Beaver County. 8 structures were reported destroyed across Texas and Woodward counties combined. 3 buildings at the United States Department of Agriculture's Southern Plains Range Research Station were damaged, including an irrigation pump house and 2 barns, along with roughly 500 acres of research grassland that scientists had been studying for decades. That research station, located near Woodward, has operated continuously since 1913, more than a century of grassland science that informed ranching practices across the entire Great Plains. The loss of those research plots represents not just physical destruction, but the interruption of long-term ecological data that cannot be recreated. But the deepest wound fell on the ranching communities. One Beaver County rancher lost 51 head of cattle. A single Kansas producer lost 500 cattle in one night. Veterinarians euthanized more than 100 animals in the Kansas burn area that survived the flames but could not survive their injuries. State Senator Casey Murdoch, a Republican representing the Felt District, captured the deeper devastation when he explained that ranchers spend entire lifetimes building their herds and refining their genetics. The monetary loss is staggering, but it is the genetic loss, decades of careful selective breeding erased in hours, that cannot be replaced by insurance payments or disaster relief checks. Beyond the animals themselves, miles upon miles of fencing were destroyed, and thousands of acres of grazing land will require ranchers to purchase supplemental hay for months until grass regenerates. The Oklahoma Cattlemen's Foundation established a fire relief fund, and ranchers began filing for federal disaster assistance. The response to the Ranger Road fire revealed something remarkable about how seriously forecasters took the conditions before the first flame appeared. Oklahoma's State Emergency Operations Center activated on February 16, a full day before the fire started, in anticipation of the extreme weather forecast. This was not a reactive scramble. Emergency managers saw the catastrophic conditions forming and positioned resources in advance. Governor Stitt declared a state of emergency for Beaver, Texas, and Woodward counties on February 18, later adding Harper County on February 19. The Federal Emergency Management Agency approved 3 fire management assistance grants covering the Ranger Road fire, the Stevens fire, and the 43 fire, providing 75% reimbursement for eligible firefighting costs. The response coalition was enormous. Oklahoma Forestry Services deployed fire suppression teams. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol managed evacuations and road closures. The Oklahoma Department of Transportation, Turnpike Authority, State Department of Health, Department of Agriculture, National Weather Service, tribal nations, and the Oklahoma National Guard all coordinated through the State Emergency Operations Center. The American Red Cross provided food for evacuees. Oklahoma Baptist Disaster Relief delivered 200 meals for firefighters and responders in Beaver County. Kansas fire crews from Saline, Shawnee, and Marion counties crossed the state line to assist in the Ashland area. Key road closures included U.S. Highway 64 between State Highway 23 east of Forgan and US 283 near Ralston, State Highway 34 in Woods County from US 64 to the Kansas state line, and sections of Kansas Highways 283, 160, and 183. Heavy smoke caused a 7-vehicle crash on Highway 54 near Tyrone, an accident that also ignited the separate side road fire, demonstrating how the fires created cascading hazards that extended far beyond the burn perimeter itself. The Ranger Road fire was the largest of multiple simultaneous wildfires burning across the southern plains in mid-February 2026. The Stevens fire consumed over 12,000 acres in Texas County and southern Kansas. The side road fire burned 3,680 acres in Texas County, ignited by the same highway crash caused by dense smoke that was described earlier. The 43 fire scorched 1,680 acres near Woodward, the same fire that had threatened the city's southwestern neighborhoods and forced the evacuation of 4,000 residents just hours earlier. In the Texas Panhandle, the Lavender Fire burned over 18,000 acres, and the 8 Ball Fire consumed 13,500 acres. Total burned area across the region exceeded 300,000 acres in a single 48-hour period. What makes this fire siege particularly alarming is that the Ranger Road fire burned through almost exactly the same geography as previous megafires. In 2017, the Northwest Oklahoma complex fires, anchored by the massive Starbuck Fire, originated in Beaver County, swept into Clark County, Kansas, and devastated the Ashland area, ultimately burning approximately 830,000 acres across multiple blazes. In 2024, the Smokehouse Creek Fire scorched over 1 million acres across the Texas Panhandle and western Oklahoma. In 2018, the Rhea Fire burned 283,000 acres in Dewey County, Oklahoma, nearly the identical footprint as the Ranger Road Fire. In 2016, the Anderson Creek Fire consumed 400,000 acres along the Oklahoma and Kansas border. The same corridor keeps burning, and the fires keep getting more frequent. The reasons are converging in ways that make future megafires increasingly likely. The expansion of eastern receder into grasslands provides volatile fuel that intensifies fire behavior beyond what native grass alone can produce. These trees act as ladder fuels, carrying fire from the ground into their canopies where it generates massive radiant heat and throws embers hundreds of yards ahead of the main front. Persistent drought cycles are drying out the southern plains with greater severity and duration. The drought that preceded the Ranger Road fire was not a sudden event. It had been building since late 2025, tightening its grip week after week, drawing moisture out of the soil and the vegetation until the entire landscape became a tinderbox waiting for a match. Winter temperatures are running above average, preventing the kind of moisture recovery that historically moderated fire season. And the flat, open terrain of the Panhandle offers no natural barriers to wind-driven fire spread. When conditions align, as they did on February 17, the result is a fire that can travel 60 miles in 10 hours and double in size overnight. The infrastructure of rural firefighting in the southern plains also faces a fundamental mismatch against fires of this magnitude. Volunteer fire departments form the backbone of wildfire response in the Panhandle. These departments rely on ranchers and farmers who leave their own operations to fight fires threatening their neighbors. Their equipment is often aging, their budgets are minimal. When a fire moves at 30 to 40 miles per hour across a 60-mile front, these small departments are simply overwhelmed. The Ranger Road fire demonstrated that even with advance warning, even with the State Emergency Operations Center activated a full day before ignition, the sheer speed and scale of a wind-driven grass fire can outpace every resource available. As of February 20, 2026, the Ranger Road fire stands at 283,283 acres with 20% containment. Firefighters continue working the perimeter. Aerial assets are flying when wind conditions permit. Damage assessment teams are moving through burned areas, cataloging losses that will take months to fully quantify. Ranchers are hauling water to surviving cattle and cutting through the remains of fence lines they built over generations. The communities of the Oklahoma Panhandle and southern Kansas have faced this kind of devastation before. They rebuilt after the Northwest Oklahoma Complex fires. They endured the aftermath of the Smokehouse Creek fire. They will rebuild again. But each time the fires return to this corridor, they return faster, burn hotter, and leave deeper scars on a landscape and a way of life that depends entirely on the grass beneath their feet. What separates this moment from previous fire seasons is the convergence of factors that show no sign of reversing. The cedar continues to spread, the drought cycles are intensifying. The population of volunteer firefighters is aging and shrinking as younger generations leave rural communities for urban opportunities. And the cattle industry that sustains the entire economic fabric of the Panhandle absorbs another blow each time a megafire sweeps through, thinning the herd genetics that took generations to develop and destroying the fencing infrastructure that cost tens of thousands of dollars per mile to replace. Each fire weakens the foundation that makes recovery possible from the next one. For the ranchers still hauling water to surviving cattle along blackened fence lines, for the firefighters recovering from burns and broken bones in hospital beds across 2 states, and for the families who return to find only ash where their homes once stood, the Ranger Road fire is not a statistic. It is the day the wind turned their world to cinder. The question facing these communities is no longer whether the next megafire will come. It is whether the interval between catastrophic burns will keep shrinking until the land and the people who work it can no longer recover before the next one arrives.